What if I told you that the medieval court wasn't just about knights in shiny armor jousting for glory, or kings sitting on thrones handing out decrees like a medieval HR department? What if I told you that, in reality, the court was the original reality TV show, but with higher stakes, fewer roses, and a lot more poison? Picture this. Vast stone halls echoing with music and laughter, candlelight flickering off golden goblets, silk gowns sweeping across cold marble floors. On the surface, it looks like a fairy tale banquet, but just underneath that glitter, a pressure cooker. Behind every toast, every smile, every graceful bow, someone's plotting, someone's scheming, someone's risking it all for love, or pretending to, while sharpening the dagger behind their back. Because the medieval court was not a safe place for hearts. It was a stage, a performance, a theater where everyone played their part, and losing your role didn't just mean embarrassment. It could mean exile or execution. Now, here's the twist. Love and lust weren't innocent diversions. They weren't sweet side plots in history's big story. They were the story. They were political weapons, tools of survival, secret currencies that could buy you a crown or get your head on a spike. Let's be honest. You thought your high school crush drama was complicated? Please, try navigating romance when your father is bargaining your marriage for a border treaty. Your lover is also your husband's sworn enemy, and your secret affair is common gossip in a hall packed with spies. That was medieval dating, and the stakes were always deadly. Imagine walking down a torchlit corridor. Shadows stretch across the stone. You hear whispers behind a tapestry. Are they about you? Are they plotting against you? You clutch a letter close to your chest. A love note that could condemn you if the wrong eyes see it. Your heartbeat is louder than your footsteps. Because in this world, even paper carries the weight of life and death. And the thing is, betrayal was a heartbeat of it all. Lords plotted against their own wives. Queens were accused of treason for looking at the wrong man too long. Knights, supposed paragons of loyalty, often traded their swords for lust, betraying their kings for stolen kisses in the garden. Romance wasn't just risky, it was practically treason by default. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Let's give credit where it's due. Medieval people knew how to add flair to their mess. Troubadours sang epic ballads about forbidden love. Poets turned toxic relationships into noble tales of honor. Everyone loved to pretend this chaos was chivalry. It was their version of glossy Instagram filters, romantic poetry masking what was basically an emotional dumpster fire. Think of it like this. Courtly love was a medieval version of PR. Knights would pine over unattainable ladies. Queens pretended their marriages were all about honor, and troubadours sang about noble passion. Meanwhile, the real stories involved betrayal, jealousy, poison, and more backstabbing than an entire season of Game of Thrones. And here's where it gets spicy. Sometimes these romances didn't just ruin reputations. They changed history. Entire dynasties fell because of one affair. Wars erupted because of jealousy. Families clawed each other apart over whispered rumors of illegitimate heirs. A single kiss could alter the fate of a kingdom. A single night could decide who lived and who was branded a traitor forever. So buckle in. We're about to unravel the scandal sheets of medieval Europe. Only they didn't have tabloids. They had gossiping courtiers with sharper tongues and swords. We're going to pull back the curtain on the stories that never made it into the sanitized fairy tales. The love affairs that toppled crowns. The betrayals that rewrote family trees. And the lust that burned brighter than any torch in the Great Hall. And here's the thing. Sure, the castles have crumbled. The crowns are locked behind museum glass. But the games never ended. Strip away the chainmail, and we're still playing them today. Love, lust, betrayal. They're just as powerful in boardrooms, in politics, even in your messy group chat. The costumes change, but the script? Oh, it's the same old drama. So let me ask you, was it ever really love? Or was it always just ambition? Dressed up in velvet and candlelight? Was it about the heart? Or was it always about the throne? Because when you look closely at the medieval court, the answer is never simple. It's both. It's always both. Now, take a deep breath, adjust your armor, and keep your goblet close. Because the story we're stepping into isn't just history. It's the greatest scandal series never filmed. Welcome to the world of love, lust, and betrayal in medieval courts. Picture this. A morning mist coils itself around towering gray walls of stone. Castle turrets pierce the sky like the jagged teeth of some great beast. Down below, peasants trudge through mud, their backs bent, their breaths clouding the air like smoke from a dying fire. The ground is wet, the fields are heavy, and above them, the castle looms, watching silent, eternal. Now step inside. The air changes. The scent of smoke and roasted meat wraps around you. Torchlight flickers against vaulted ceilings, dancing shadows across banners that hang in proud defiance. A banquet hall stretches before you, endless rows of tables laden with bread, venison, and goblets filled to the brim. Laughter roars, songs echo, the clang of cups against it reverberates like war drums. But beneath the surface, beneath the music, beneath the chatter, something darker hums. Because this isn't just a feast. This isn't just a hall of kings and queens. This is a stage. And every person here, knight, scribe, jester, noblewoman, is an actor. Every glance across the table could mean loyalty or treachery. Every toast might signal friendship or the start of a plot. Every hand brushing another under the table could be a spark of romance. Or the beginning of a war. The medieval court. Majestic. Terrifying. A place where power wore a smile, but always kept a dagger tucked inside its sleeve. And here's the thing. Love in this world wasn't sweet. It wasn't innocent. It wasn't two people finding each other across a crowded room. Love was a weapon, a tool, a move on the chessboard. Ask yourself, what's more dangerous in a room like this? A sword raised in anger or a whispered promise of devotion, which could topple a kingdom faster? An invading army or a queen accused of loving the wrong man? Because here, whispers could kill faster than blades, and rumors could topple thrones before catapults even rolled into place. Imagine walking through the stone corridors. The cold air nips at your skin. Echoing footsteps follow you like ghosts. From behind a tapestry, you hear voices, soft, quick, urgent. Do you stop to listen? Do you keep walking? Because one careless pause might brand you a spy. One overheard word might drag you into a scandal you didn't ask for. That was life in the court. A constant balancing act between grandeur and danger, between velvet and blood, between love and betrayal. Now, let's not romanticize this too much. These were not Disney castles. The walls were damp, the rats were plentiful, and the beds, let's just say they weren't memory foam. But that didn't matter. The power that pulsed through these stone chambers was intoxicating. People didn't just live here. They plotted, they schemed, they burned with ambition. And in the center of it all, love. Or at least, something that called itself love. Kings sought mistresses who could bring influence. Queens clung to favorites who offered more than companionship. Knights pledged themselves to noble ladies, weaving oaths that were equal parts poetry and politics. It wasn't Cupid's arrow that mattered. It was survival's dagger. Because here's the cruel truth. If you didn't play the game of love right, you wouldn't just end up heartbroken. You'd end up dead. Pause for a second. Think of your most awkward date. Maybe it ended with silence. Maybe it ended with a bad excuse. Now imagine the same scene, but if you made the wrong move, an executioner sharpened his axe the next morning. Welcome to medieval romance. The castle wasn't just stone and mortar. It was alive, breathing. Every echo, every whisper, every laugh carried weight. It was a living, breathing beast that fed on ambition, on secrecy, on desire. And like any beast, it could turn on you in an instant. Let's break this duality down. On one hand, the court was the nerve center of governance. Decisions made here affected the lives of thousands. Laws written, treaties signed, taxes levied. Kings stood at the helm. Queens advised, counselors schemed, bishops prayed. It was bureaucracy dressed in velvet and gold. On the other hand, the same hall where treaties were signed was also where lovers exchanged secret glances, where a single smile across the room could ignite suspicion, where a stray rumor could unravel alliances. It was politics. It was passion. It was danger wrapped in silk. Picture a banquet. The music is loud, the laughter louder. A lord raises his goblet to toast a king. Everyone cheers. But look closer. Look at the lady across the room, her eyes darting to the knight at her side. Look at the servant slipping quietly through the door, carrying a note tucked beneath the bread. Look at the king himself, smiling, but gripping his goblet just a little too tight, because he knows betrayal can hide behind even the warmest cheer. This was a medieval court, a paradox, a place of majesty and menace. And love? Love was never just love. It was leverage. It was survival. It was the sharpest dagger of all. Sometimes it looked noble. Knights reciting poetry, ladies wearing ribbons tied with promises, troubadours singing of impossible romances, all the pomp and pageantry of chivalry. But behind the pretty verses and grand gestures, love was transactional. Love was tactical. A marriage wasn't about hearts. It was about land. An affair wasn't about passion. It was about power. Even flirtation wasn't innocent. It was reconnaissance. And yet, despite the danger, despite the stakes, despite the risks of ruin, people kept falling. They kept chasing. They kept risking it all for that one intoxicating taste of passion. Why? Because in a world so brutal, so cold, so ruthless, love, even the dangerous kind, was the one thing that made life feel alive. So when we talk about the medieval court, don't picture dusty history. Don't picture lifeless statues of kings and queens. Picture a living theater. Picture a stage where every player wore a mask. Picture a room buzzing with secrets, humming with temptation, glowing with grandeur, and simmering with betrayal. This was not just politics. This was not just governance. This was survival dressed as romance. This was lust cloaked in velvet. This was ambition whispered between kisses. And by the end of it, you'll see the court itself was a character, living, breathing, watching, testing. It devoured the weak. It rewarded the cunning. And it thrived on the dangerous game of love. So take another sip from that goblet. Step carefully across those cold stone floors. And listen closely. Because in the medieval court, the walls had ears. And every heartbeat, every glance, every secret carried the weight of a kingdom. Step into the court again. The music softens. The torches burn steady. And now we peel back the velvet curtain, not to glimpse the feasting or the battles, but to study the social fabric that held this dangerous theater together. Because make no mistake, the medieval court was a world governed by ritual, by etiquette, by rules so elaborate, so suffocating, that every smile, every bow, every glance carried layers of meaning. To live here was to perform. To survive here was to master the code. Start with the queens and princesses. Their lives were signed away before they could even write their own names. Marriages were contracts sealed not by love, but by treaties and dowries. A princess was less a bride and more a political chess piece, moved across the board by fathers, uncles, kings. Because nothing screams romance quite like your father-in-law using you as a pawn in a land deal. Imagine being 14 years old, shipped off across the sea, handed to a stranger twice your age, told this man is now your husband, and your body, your children, your entire future are bargaining chips for a peace between kingdoms. Some girls wept. Others steeled themselves. And a few learned to play the game better than anyone, bending those chains into weapons of their own. But what about the knights? Ah yes, the knights. Gleaming armor, flowing banners, sworn to honor and duty. Yet beneath all that, they were dreamers, idealists, sometimes hypocrites. They clung to the idea of courtly love, that intoxicating belief that to worship a noble lady, often unattainable, was the highest form of devotion. Picture a knight riding into battle, not just for his king, but for a silk ribbon tied to his lance, given by a woman he could never truly have. It sounds noble, poetic, until you remember that many of these forbidden loves weren't symbolic. They were very real, very dangerous, and very likely to end with someone being dragged to a dungeon. Because here's the irony. While troubadours strummed lutes and sang about love's nobility, real romance in the court looked a lot more like high-stakes poker. Bluffing, calculating, knowing exactly when to bet your reputation, and when a foe before your head was on the chopping block. Courtiers, those slippery middle players, walked the tightest rope of all. They weren't kings or queens. They weren't knights with vows of honor. They were the go-betweens, the whisperers, the rumor peddlers, the watchers. A misplaced glance, a smile that lingered too long, a laugh shared at the wrong moment. Those tiny signals could launch suspicion, jealousy, or a scandal that might cost them everything. Think about it. In a world where your worth was your reputation, your status was your shield. And romance? Romance was a double-edged sword. To catch the attention of someone powerful might mean protection, fortune, even influence over the king himself. But to catch the wrong attention, that could mean exile, or worse. So everyone played roles. Lovers pretended, friends lied, rivals smiled through gritted teeth. It was theater, staged for an audience of spies, rivals, and opportunists. And the spotlight never dimmed. Now, picture the contradictions. In the candlelit halls, troubadours sang of noble hearts and destiny. Knights swore loyalty that dripped with poetry. Queens were painted as paragons of grace, ladies as muses, and men as noble suitors. But in the shadows of those same halls, whispered rumors slithered. Jealous rivals fanned flames. Betrayals brewed. It's almost laughable. On one hand, you had love ballads that could melt the hardest heart. On the other, you had courtiers spreading gossip like wildfire, ensuring those same hearts were torn apart before sunrise. And all the while, marriages were forged, alliances sealed, kingdoms bartered like livestock. Let's pause here. Ask yourself, how much of what we call romance today is performance? How many love stories are shaped not by hearts, but by circumstance, by expectation, by convenience? If you've ever rolled your eyes at a cheesy Instagram couple post, congratulations, you just tapped into the medieval court's greatest tradition, love as performance. Because here, nothing was private. Nothing. Every move was observed, weighed, whispered about. Behind fans, behind goblets, behind polite laughter, eyes watched. Enemies listened, allies judged, and love became less a feeling, more a language. A code, a brush of the hand, might mean loyalty. A glance across a crowded hall could spark months of rumor. A single dance might be interpreted as treason. And God forbid a letter was intercepted. That was basically signing your own death warrant. And yet, the people in these courts didn't stop playing. Why? Because in a world where survival depended on cunning, love, real or feigned, was one of the sharpest tools available. For queens, a trusted lover might mean influence over policy. For knights, devotion to a lady might win them favor and advancement. For courtiers, attaching themselves to a powerful mistress or nobleman could transform them from nobodies into power brokers. But the risks were relentless. Every flirtation carried danger. Every secret affair was a gamble. And the higher you climbed, the harder the fall when the whispers reached the wrong ears. The medieval court wasn't a backdrop. It wasn't just a castle with pretty walls. It was a living stage. Every smile, every bow, every love song was part of a script. And the audience? Ruthless. They weren't clapping. They were waiting. Waiting for you to slip. Waiting for you to stumble. Waiting for the scandal that would let them rise in your place. And that is why love here was never innocent. It was survival. It was strategy. It was a drama played out not just in hearts, but in thrones, in lands, in crowns. So the next time you hear a medieval love ballad, dripping with chivalry and longing, remember this. Behind the pretty words, there were rivalries brewing. Behind the noble gestures, there were knives hidden. And behind every romance, there was always a price to pay. Because in the court, love was not just love. It was politics. It was theater. It was the most dangerous game of all. History books like to tell us about battles, about treaties, about the rise and fall of kings. But here's the secret no one writes on the parchment. Behind every crown, every scepter, every throne, there was always a love story, or betrayal disguised as one. Because love, lust, and betrayal weren't accents of history. They weren't footnotes. They were the engines that drove it all. Picture a queen, draped in silk, crowned in gold, seated beside her husband at a glittering banquet. She smiles. She nods. She plays her part. But behind the curtain, Behind those jeweled eyes, there's a whisper scandal, a rumor of forbidden affection, a knight perhaps, who lingers too long when their hands brush. And suddenly, that queen's heart isn't just her own. It's dynamite waiting to explode. We tend to think of infidelity as a private affair. In the medieval court, it was treason. A queen accused of adultery wasn't just an unfaithful wife. She was a political threat, a destabilizer, a weapon in her enemy's hands. Think of Eleanor of Aquitaine, accused of betraying Henry II, or Isabella of France, whispered about with suspicion. These women weren't just queens, they were lightning rods, and their supposed loves could redraw the map of Europe. Now let's flip the crown. Lords, too, risked it all for forbidden passions. Some abandoned alliances, squandered fortunes, even faced exile just to chase a kiss in the wrong chamber. Imagine being noble with everything to lose, land, armies, loyalty, and still risking it all for a secret tryst. Foolish? Maybe. Human? Absolutely. And yet, every time they gambled on desire, history shifted. And then, the clerics, the ones who thunder from pulpits about the dangers of lust, who warned that passion would drag souls straight to hellfire. They preached chastity. They demanded purity. They wagged fingers at the court sins. And yet, many of them were indulging in the very pleasures they condemned. Whisper affairs with noble women, hidden children, lovers tucked away in abbeys. The hypocrisy wasn't just amusing, it was damning. When the very people charged with guarding morality broke their own vows, it revealed a truth the court already knew. Nobody was immune. Not the queen, not the lord, not even the priest. So let me ask you, what shaped kingdoms more? The clash of armies at dawn, or the whispered rumors in the queen's bedchamber? Was it steel that built empires, or scandal? Because the pattern is clear. Again and again, behind political upheavals we find stories of love gone wrong, of lust that burned too bright, of betrayals that cut deeper than any blade. Picture candlelit chambers, curtains drawn, a queen clutching a letter that could doom her. Picture trials held in shadowy halls, torches casting judgment across pale faces. Picture the silence after a sentence is spoken. Guilty. Always guilty. The tone shifts here. No more playful teasing. No more ironic quips. This is where the weight settles in. Where the audience realizes this isn't a gossip column. It's life and death. Because in the medieval court, desire was not a side plot. It was the crucible. It was a fire where ambition and passion melted together. Think of it. A marriage could seal an alliance. An affair could spark a war. A betrayal could collapse a dynasty. These weren't accidents. They were the very mechanisms by which history turned. And the irony? The songs of chivalry, the poems of noble love, the ballads of knights worshipping their ladies, those were the masks. Pretty disguises to cover the ruthless truth. They sang of purity while drowning in betrayal. They strummed lutes about honor while plotting assassinations in the shadows. Behind the art, behind the pageantry, behind the crowns and scepters, there was always a burning torch of desire, sometimes tender, sometimes reckless, always dangerous. So by the time you step fully into this story, understand this. We are not just walking into courts of politics. We are stepping into arenas of passion, into cages of lust, into dens of betrayal where every embrace carried risk and every secret kiss could topple a throne. This isn't just history. It's a saga where power and desire collided again and again, leaving kingdoms shattered in their wake. So the next time you hear of a king deposed, a war ignited, a dynasty undone, don't just think of armies or taxes or treaties. Think of love. Think of lust. Think of betrayal. Because in the medieval court, these weren't distractions. They were the script, the driving force, the fire that shaped destiny. And as we move deeper, remember this final thought. Castles crumble, crowns tarnish, banners fade. But desire? Desire burns hotter than any torch, brighter than any banquet, stronger than any chain. It always has. It always will. Picture this. A chapel lit by trembling candles, incense heavy in the air. Two teenagers stand awkwardly at the altar, eyes darting nervously to the strangers who will now be their in-laws. They don't know each other. They've barely spoken. Yet today, they are the foundation of peace between kingdoms. No pressure, right? Just smile, say the vows, and hope your marriage prevents a war. Welcome to the mechanics of medieval courtship. Forget moonlit strolls, whispered confessions under stars, or roses tucked into windowsills. Love here was paperwork. Signatures. Treaties disguised as romance. A marriage was a contract. A dowry was a bribe dressed up in gold and silk. And the wedding night? That was less about passion, more about producing heirs who could secure a dynasty. Now pause for a moment. Ask yourself, does this sound romantic? Or does it sound like the medieval version of a corporate merger, complete with awkward handshakes and way too much fine print? Because that's exactly what it was. The truth is, the medieval court didn't care about love at first sight. They cared about land, about titles, about borders and taxes. A princess wasn't just a daughter. She was a bargaining chip packaged with territory and soldiers. A prince wasn't just a husband. He was an insurance policy for alliances. Imagine you're a young noblewoman. One day, your father tells you you're to be married, not because of your smile, not because of your laugh, not even because of your intelligence, but because your dowry can secure 3 castles and a peace treaty. You look at him, maybe terrified, maybe resigned, and he says something like, "Daughter, you are the key to stability in this realm." Translation? Congrats! You're the glue stick holding our war-torn lands together. Try not to mess it up. That's not romance. That's survival. And it wasn't just the brides who felt the weight. Grooms, too, were pawns in these elaborate games. Picture a young prince being told he'll marry a girl from a rival kingdom. He doesn't know her. He doesn't love her. But he knows what's at stake. If he refuses, it could mean war. If he accepts, it could mean lifelong misery. He stands there, caught between his own desires and his duty to an entire nation. It's almost absurd, isn't it? Troubadours were out there strumming lutes, singing about noble love and destiny, while real marriages were decided in smoky council chambers with maps spread across tables. Kings and advisors pointed at borders, calculated inheritances, and said things like, "Yes, your daughter will do nicely. Send her by summer." And when the day came, the wedding was wrapped in pageantry. Bells rang. Crowds cheered. Priests droned on about holy unions. But beneath all that glittering ceremony was tension thick enough to choke on. Everyone wondered, would this marriage cement the peace or unravel it? Would the couple produce heirs? Or spark more conflict? Picture the bride, walking down the aisle in a heavy gown, embroidered with gold. She looks radiant. Yes, but inside, she's terrified. Her vows aren't just to her husband. They're to an entire kingdom. Her body, her womb, her life. All part of a contract inked long before she was old enough to understand it. Now let's inject a little humor. Because honestly, the absurdity deserves it. Imagine being that teenage princess, and your first conversation with your new husband is, "So, nice treaty our family signed, right?" Forget sparks flying. It's more like 2 awkward interns forced to collaborate on a group project that determines the fate of Europe. And yet, this was a reality. Dowries weren't just gifts. They were weapons. Entire wars were fought over unpaid dowries. Alliances collapsed when promised lands didn't change hands. A missing chest of gold could be the spark that reignited bloodshed. It's easy to laugh at the absurdity, but let's not lose the gravity. For those trapped in these arrangements, the stakes were life or death. A wife who failed to produce heirs to be cast aside, humiliated, or worse. A husband who defied his arranged match could doom his family. Courtship wasn't about butterflies in the stomach. It was about keeping your head attached to your body. And this is where the contradictions deepen. While marriages were cold and calculated, the court still adored the performance of romance. Candlelit chapels, whispered vows, minstrel singing of eternal devotion. The rituals painted a picture of love, but the reality underneath was more like a high-stakes chess match. Every move mattered. Every gesture carried weight. So ask yourself, was medieval love ever about the heart, or was it always about the throne? Think about those weddings again. The nervous laughter, the whispered prayers, the vows spoken with trembling voices. Every couple was a gamble. Would their union create peace, or would it shatter into betrayal and war? And here's the kicker. Sometimes, against all odds, love did bloom in those arranged marriages. Sometimes, two strangers thrown together by politics actually found companionship, even passion. But more often than not, the tension between duty and desire gnawed at them until it unraveled everything. The medieval courtship system was a paradox. On the surface, all ritual and beauty. Beneath it, all strategy and survival. And the young men and women trapped inside it, they had to play their roles, knowing that one wrong move could cost not just their happiness, but their lives. So remember this. When we talk about medieval courtship, we're not talking about fairy tales. We're talking about contracts written in blood. We're talking about vows that carried the weight of kingdoms. We're talking about a world where love was never free, because love in the medieval court was power. Picture the court again. The feasts are over. The torches burn low. The great hall is silent now, save for the faint echo of footsteps retreating into the dark. On the surface, all seems calm, a kingdom at rest. But beneath this quiet, a storm brews. Because in the medieval court, love didn't stop at the altar. It spilled into shadows, into gardens, into chambers locked against prying eyes. Forbidden, dangerous, and irresistible. Let's start with the queens. Bound to kings and marriages forged for politics, not passion, many queens live their lives as ceremonial wives, symbols of alliance, bearers of heirs. But some dared to reach for more, to defy their vows, to seek the affection, the excitement, the intimacy denied them in loveless unions. One stolen kiss, one late-night meeting, one whispered promise. And suddenly, a queen wasn't just a consort, she was a traitor. Think about that. A man could betray his king with armies and still be negotiated with. But a queen accused of loving the wrong man, that was unforgivable. Her heart wasn't hers to give. It belonged to the crown, the dynasty, the realm itself. And yet, the affairs continued. Because passion does not yield to law. Now imagine the knights. Oaths sworn on holy relics, lives dedicated to honor and loyalty. But what is honor when temptation calls from across the banquet hall? What is loyalty when desire stirs in the heart? Many knights found themselves drawn into the gravity of forbidden romances. Some saw it as courtly devotion, others as lust disguised with poetry. But either way, the risks were monumental. Picture a knight slipping to the gardens after midnight, chainmail muffled beneath a cloak. He carries not a sword, but a letter, words scrawled in ink, soaked with longing. He leaves it tucked beneath a stone or slipped into a hand. A love letter, yes, but also a death sentence if found. Because in the medieval court, paper could be as dangerous as steel. And oh, the mistresses, the women who wielded more power than crowns, yet without ever sitting on a throne. These were not simply lovers. They were confidants, informants, manipulators, sometimes even puppet masters. Some mistresses bent kings to their will, guiding policy from behind silken curtains. Others orchestrated rivalries, fueling jealousy to eliminate threats. Imagine being a queen, sitting proudly beside your husband, while across the hall a mistress, your rival, hold his gaze, and with it, the future of your realm. Who truly had more power in that moment? The crown queen, or the woman who held the king's heart? But here's where it turns absurd. Because in this world, desire wasn't private. It was public currency. A single intercepted love note could spark scandal that spread faster than wildfire. Courtiers lived for it. Servants whispered it. Spies collected it. And rivals used it like arrows, piercing reputations before swords were ever drawn. Think about that for a moment. Today, you send a risky text. Maybe you get embarrassed if the wrong person sees it. Back then, that text, your love letter, could cost you your head. And don't forget the setting. These weren't modern apartments with closed doors and locked phones. These were castles filled with eyes and ears, servants in corridors, guards on duty, ladies in waiting hovering close. Privacy was rare, and in a place where every glance mattered, A sidelong look across a chamber could doom you as surely as being caught in bed. Picture a crowded banquet, goblets raised, music playing. But in the corner, two glances meet and linger just a second too long. Someone notices. A rival. A spy. And from that moment, the seed is planted. Whispers spread. Allegations grow. And by the time the rumor reaches a king, it's no longer a suspicion, it's truth. And what did truth mean in the medieval court? It meant trials. It meant interrogations. It meant the scrape of steel against the executioner's whetstone. Because treason here wasn't always armies storming castles. Sometimes treason was simply desire. A kiss that shouldn't have happened. A letter that should never have been written. A glance that lasted too long. And let's not sugarcoat the outcomes. These forbidden loves didn't end in bittersweet partings or mutual goodbyes. They ended in ruin, public disgrace, exile, or worse, death by rope, by fire, by blade. Yet people still risked it. Again and again they risked it. Why? Because passion is stubborn. Because desire does not bend to kings nor queens, nor even the fear of death. So ask yourself, what's more dangerous in a medieval court? A knight with a sword or a knight with secret? A queen with armies behind her or a queen with a lover in the shadows? Because here, love wasn't just reckless. It was treasonous. And treason in the medieval world rarely ended with heartbreak. It ended with the executioner stepping forward, his axe glinting in the torchlight. This was the price of passion in a world where power was everything. And it's a reason love, lust, and betrayal weren't just stories whispered in shadows. They were the very forces that shaped kingdoms. Picture a hall gone quiet after the feast. The torches burn low. Shadows crawl across the walls, and into that silence steps a man with a lute. A troubadour. His voice cuts through the still air, singing a love so pure, so noble, so utterly unattainable that every lady sighs and every knight clenches his jaw in longing. This was the soundtrack of the medieval court, the poetry of courtly love. Romantic ballads that painted desire not as lust, but as sacred devotion. Knights were urged to adore women they could never have. Married queens. Noble ladies promised to others. The more forbidden, the better. It was love rewritten as destiny. Lust dressed up in velvet robes of honor. Sounds beautiful, doesn't it? A knight kneeling before his lady, pledging to serve her with sword and soul. A queen glancing down from the dais, eyes softening, lips trembling with a smile. It feels cinematic, legendary. But here's the catch. While the poems waxed poetic, reality was messy. Because in real life, these romances weren't built on glowing verses. They were fueled by jealousy, by manipulation, by betrayals whispered behind closed doors. Think about it. Troubadours sang of knights risking everything for their lady's favor. In practice, that favor often meant feuding with rivals, abandoning duty, even betraying kings. Poets celebrated longing as noble. Reality turned longing into war. And yet, the court ate it up. They adored it. These songs became propaganda, romanticizing desire and danger until people believed in it. They wanted to live up to it. Knights slipped ribbons on their armor. Ladies encouraged oaths whispered in shadows. And all the while, real marriages, arranged, cold, practical, stood in stark contrast. It's ironic, isn't it? The more loveless reality became, the more intoxicating the fantasy grew. Now, let's have some fun with this. Imagine a troubadour strumming away about loyalty and honor, while across the hall, half the couples listening are embroiled in scandals so wild they'd make reality TV blush. A knight pining for a lady he can't touch. A queen rumored to be meeting someone in secret after the song ends. And yet everyone sighs at the verse as though it's scripture. Medieval poets, turning toxic relationships into power ballads since the 12th century. And here's the kicker. These ballads weren't harmless. They set impossible standards. Knights were told to worship women like goddesses, to put love above duty, to risk all for passion. Sounds thrilling. But what happens when knights actually believed it? When they actually acted on it? You guessed it. Chaos. Wars flared when knights abandoned campaigns to chase forbidden loves. Alliances fracture when affairs, once glamorized in song, turn into very real betrayals. Poets had turned fantasy into expectation, and expectation into disaster. Think of it like this. Every ballad was a spark, and in a hall already soaked with oil, jealousy, suspicion, ambition, that spark could burn the whole place down. Yet still, troubadours sang. Picture another scene. Candlelight flickers on vaulted ceilings. A poet recites lines of undying devotion, while a lady's husband sits 3 seats away, smiling politely, knuckles whitening around his goblet. Everyone hears the words. Everyone sees the blush creep across her cheeks. And everyone knows what comes next. This wasn't just entertainment. It was theater. It was performance layered over reality until you couldn't tell where the song ended and the scandal began. And isn't that the genius? These poets shaped the lens through which people saw love. They told knights and ladies that their reckless desires weren't sins. They were virtues. They wrapped danger in ribbons. They made betrayal sound like destiny. But destiny has consequences. And in the medieval court, consequences were never kind. Ask yourself, how many heads rolled because of a ballad? How many reputations crumbled because someone took a verse too seriously? How many kingdoms bled because a knight thought it was noble to betray his oath in the name of love? And yet, without those songs, would the court have been the same? Would passion have burned as fiercely without poets fanning the flames? Because here's the truth. Art didn't just reflect a world of love and lust. It shaped it. Troubadours were the medieval PR agents, the spin doctors. They sold the idea of love so convincingly that people lived and died by it. And maybe that's the most dangerous part. So the next time you imagine a lute playing in a candlelit hall, remember the shadows that gathered just outside that glow. Remember the knights who believed the verses, and the queens who bore the blame. Remember the jealousy, the manipulation, the betrayals wrapped in rhyme. Because in the medieval court, poetry was never just pretty words. It was temptation and melody. It was danger disguised as devotion. It was a soundtrack to scandals that reshaped history. And like every good ballad, it ended not in harmony, but in blood. Picture the court one last time before the storm breaks. The music has faded. The torches hiss in the damp air. Every glance across the hall carries a question. Every whisper could be a weapon. Because here, romance was never just romance. It was a tool, a dagger in silk, a crown wrapped in velvet. This was a world where mistresses became spies, where lovers doubled as informants, where passion wasn't just risky, it was political strategy. Think of the king's mistress. To the outside world, she was a scandal, a shame, a distraction. But behind the curtains, she often knew more than ministers. She listened to the king's frustrations in the dark of night, heard his secrets when his guard was down, and whispered her own ideas back into his ear. Some mistresses shifted policy more than any counselor ever could. They didn't wear crowns, but they shaped kingdoms. And queens? Their positions were even more perilous. A single accusation of infidelity could shatter everything. It didn't matter if it was true. Rumor alone could undo them. A rival noble could spread a whisper, and suddenly the queen wasn't a queen. She was a criminal. And once a queen's virtue was questioned, the entire dynasty trembled. Now imagine the ripple effect. A rumor in one chamber sparks jealousy in another. A husband doubts his wife. A nobleman suspects betrayal. An alliance, once sealed by marriage, begins to crack. And in medieval Europe, a cracked alliance was never just personal. It was political. It was war waiting to happen. Picture 2 kingdoms bound by a royal marriage. Peace at last, sealed with vows and rings. But then, a whisper. The bride is unfaithful. The husband is humiliated. The families clash. And what was once a celebration of unity becomes a tinderbox for bloodshed. All because of desire. All because of suspicion. That's the thing about romance in the medieval court. It wasn't a subplot. It wasn't decoration. It was the engine, the heartbeat of power. And propaganda? Oh! Propaganda made sure of it. Enemies planted rumors like seeds, knowing they would grow into scandals. A forged letter, a whispered tale, a servant bribed to see something in the shadows. Lies traveled faster than truth, and by the time the truth limped into the hall, Heads had already rolled. Ask yourself, what's deadlier in a medieval court? A sharpened sword or a whispered rumor? Which killed more dynasties? Which toppled more crowns? Because make no mistake, noble houses crumbled not only under the weight of war, but under the weight of gossip. One accusation, one affair, one whispered scandal in the wrong ear, an entire family's legacy went up in smoke. And here's the cruel irony. These games of love, these dangerous dances of lust and betrayal, they weren't random. They weren't accidents. They were rehearsals. Rehearsals for the greater betrayals and bloodshed yet to come. The affairs, the rumors, the poison slipped into goblets. These were the warm-ups, the preludes, the sharpening of knives before the real cut was made. Think about it. A knight betrays his king for love. What lesson does that teach the court? That loyalty is negotiable. A queen is accused of infidelity. What precedent does that set? That crowns can be shaken by whispers. A mistress manipulates her lover into punishing rivals. What does that reveal? That desire is the most dangerous advisor of all. And through it all, humor lurks. Dark humor. Sarcasm. Because sometimes the absurdity was impossible to ignore. Picture medieval couples counseling. Step 1. Survive the poison test. Step 2. Deny the affair. Step 3. Hope the executioner isn't already waiting outside. Not exactly the stuff of fairy tales. Yet beneath the irony is the truth. Romance was the most volatile substance in the medieval court. Handle it carefully, and it might bind kingdoms together. Mishandle it, and it exploded, destroying families, fracturing alliances, igniting wars. By now, the pattern is undeniable. Love, lust, betrayal, they weren't sideshows. They were the show. The script everyone was forced to play. The engine driving every scheme, every plot, every downfall. And so we arrive at the edge. The stage is set. The torches burn lower. The court holds its breath. The whispers are growing louder, sharper, deadlier. The affairs have set the foundation. The propaganda has spread like wildfire. The jealousy has seeped into every corner of the hall. What comes next is no longer flirtation in gardens or glances across banquet tables. What comes next is poison poured into cups. Wars ignited by scandal. Dynasties undone by desire. This is the pivot. From intrigue into bloodshed. From whispers into screams. From secret glances into open betrayals. The court is ready. The players are set. And the games of love are about to explode into the brutal theater of survival. Picture a great hall at the height of a feast. The air is thick with the smell of roasted meat and spilled wine. Goblets clink. Laughter echoes off the stone walls. The fire roars, banners sway, and everyone looks like they're having the time of their lives. But here's the catch. Every sip of wine, every bite of meat, every cheerful toast could be the last. Welcome to the darker side of medieval romance. A world where passion didn't just stir hearts, it signed death warrants. Where jealousy and ambition weren't satisfied with rumors or slander. They reached straight for poison. Because nothing said, "I love you," in the medieval court quite like slipping arsenic into someone's cup. Now pause. Imagine you're sitting at that banquet table. A servant pours wine into your goblet. You smile, you nod politely. But inside, your stomach twists. Is this the drink that ends you? Will the next swallow burn like fire in your throat? You raise the goblet. Your hand trembles. You sip. You wait. You pray. That was the paranoia of court life. Every feast was a gamble. Every toast a potential death sentence. And it wasn't paranoia without reason. Queens were suspected of poisoning rivals. Mistresses quietly eliminated competition. Brothers betrayed brothers across candlelit tables. Take Eleanor of Aquitaine, for instance. A queen so powerful, so influential. Her enemies whispered constantly about her supposed use of poison to maintain her dominance. Was it true? Maybe. Maybe not. But in a court built on suspicion, rumor was enough. Or look to Italy, where entire families, like the Borgias, became infamous for turning banquets into battlefields without ever drawing a sword. Invite your enemies to dinner. Serve them fine wine. Smile as they drink. Wait for the coughing to begin. Efficient, elegant, deadly. Poison was the perfect weapon. Silent, invisible, and best of all, deniable. Was it murder, or was it just bad luck? Food gone sour? Wine spoiled in the barrel? No one could ever be sure. And so the banquet became a stage, a theater of fear. Picture the scene. A hall glittering with torches, music swelling, nobles raising their cups in unison. But watch their hands. Watch the way they hesitate. Watch how a servant drinks first before handing the goblet to a lord. Because trust was a luxury no one could afford. Now imagine the lovers caught in this deadly dance. A mistress who knew her position was fragile. A rival at court whispered too close to the king. The solution? A subtle drop in the wine. A powdered dose hidden in honey cakes. One sweet taste and problem solved. Romance here wasn't tender. It wasn't innocent. It was survival. And survival meant eliminating anyone who stood in the way. And let's not pretend this was all about subtlety. Sometimes it was brazen. A noble collapses mid-toast. The music stops. The hall falls silent. A goblet slips from a hand and crashes to the floor. Eyes dart across the table. Who poured the wine? Who passed the cup? Who benefits from this sudden, convenient death? Whispers ripple through the hall. Suspicion clings like smoke. Everyone wonders the same thing. Who's next? Ah, yes, medieval dating tips. Step 1, make eye contact. Step 2, compliment their gown. Step 3, don't die from poison at the banquet. Because here's the bitter irony. Banquets were supposed to unite people, to celebrate alliances, to honor marriages. Yet they often became the very stage where those alliances were shattered, where marriages ended in tragedy, where rivals fell one sip at a time. Love, lust, jealousy, ambition, they all had seats at the table. And poison? Poison was the invisible guest. Consider Catherine de' Medici centuries later, accused of using poison to control the French court. Whether true or not, the accusation reveals a climate of fear. Women close to power, women entangled in romance or rivalry, were always suspected of knowing more than they should, of wielding influence not with armies, but with powders and potions. And sometimes the suspicion itself was enough to destroy them. Picture a queen accused of poisoning her rival. She may be innocent. She may not even know what arsenic smells like. But once the rumor spreads, it doesn't matter. Her reputation is tarnished. Her enemies circle. Her own husband wonders if his cup is safe in her hands. And just like that, love turns lethal without a single dose of poison ever being used. That's the heart of this fear. In the medieval court, poison wasn't just about the substance. It was about the suspicion. It was about the paranoia that gnawed at every heart. Every smile might hide betrayal. Every kiss might mask a plot. So let me ask you, what's more dangerous? The poison itself or the constant fear of it, which erodes faster? The body struck by arsenic or the trust shattered by suspicion? Because in these courts, trust was already fragile. Add the specter of poison, and suddenly no one felt safe. Not kings, not queens, not knights, not lovers. And yet, the banquets continued. The toasts were raised. The goblets clinked. Because appearances mattered more than safety. You couldn't show fear. You couldn't refuse the wine. To do so would admit weakness. So everyone drank, smiling, laughing, pretending not to notice how their neighbor's hand shook as the goblet rose. This was love in the medieval world. A dance on the edge of a blade. A toast made with trembling hands. A romance shadowed by the possibility of death in every cup. So the next time you imagine a candlelit feast in a castle, don't picture only the beauty, the banners, the music, the glittering gowns. Picture the silence when a goblet falls. Picture the sudden gasp when a lord slumps forward. Picture the whispers rising like smoke as everyone asks the same terrible question. Who poisoned the chalice? Because in the medieval court, passion wasn't just risky, it was fatal. Picture this. A folded piece of parchment. Ink still wet, sealed with wax. It looks harmless enough, doesn't it? A simple letter, a token of affection, maybe a verse of poetry, maybe a line of longing. But in the medieval court, that innocent little scrap of paper could be sharper than a sword and deadlier than any dagger. Because love letters weren't just romantic gestures. They were liabilities, potential death warrants. One intercepted note could ruin reputations, fracture alliances, or start wars. Imagine being a queen, lonely, bound in a loveless political marriage. You receive a letter slipped under your door. Words of passion from a knight who dares to adore you. Your heart races. Your cheeks burn. For a moment, you feel alive. But then reality crashes back. What happens if a lady-in-waiting finds it? What happens if your husband's advisors intercept it? That letter isn't just paper. It's treason wrapped in ink. And the court knew it. That's why espionage clung to romance like a shadow. Spies weren't always cloaked assassins in the night. Sometimes, they were the maid pouring your wine. Sometimes, they were your friend smiling across the room. Sometimes, they were the scribe you trusted to copy your verses. They watched, they listened, and they carried whispers straight to the ears of rivals. And what were those whispers worth? Everything. A single intercepted letter could topple a dynasty. Picture a courtier in a dimly lit chamber. He unfolds a stolen note by candlelight. His eyes scan the words. He smirks, because he knows what he holds is not just gossip, it's ammunition. Tomorrow, that letter will circulate. Tomorrow, the queen will be accused. Tomorrow, alliances will shift. That was the terrifying power of words. It sounds absurd now, doesn't it? Today, a leaked text thread might spark scandal. But back then, a love letter could get you executed. No exaggeration. And yet, people kept writing them. They couldn't resist. Desire was too strong. Hearts burned too bright. And ink was their only release. So what did lovers do? They got creative. Coded writing. Secret symbols. Hidden meanings buried in verses of poetry. A knight might write, "Your beauty outshines the moon." Sweet, right? Except the moon wasn't just a moon. It was a code for meet me in the garden at midnight. But codes only worked if both sides remembered them. Imagine the chaos when a message meant for a lover was read by someone else who didn't understand. Or worse, pretended to understand. Suddenly, harmless poetry became incriminating evidence. And that's where jealousy made everything worse. Rival ladies-in-waiting who envied another's favor. Advisors who wanted to remove threats. They twisted words, turned innuendo into accusation, and used secrets as weapons. The medieval court was basically the birthplace of tabloid journalism. Rumor mills spun faster than any printing press. Did you hear? The queen smiled at the knight. No, she touched his hand. No, I heard she wrote him a letter. By the time the gossip reached the king, it had grown into full-blown treason. Absurd, isn't it? But deadly. Let's not forget, jealousy doesn't need proof. It only needs suspicion. And in a world where appearances mattered more than truth, suspicion was often enough to kill. So, love letters became both lifelines and nooses. Picture a young courtier slipping a folded note beneath a door. His heart pounds. His palms sweat. He turns to leave, and there, in the shadows, an informant watches. The next day, the letter is in the hands of a rival. The day after, the accusations begin. By week's end, he's exiled. Or worse, he's facing the executioner. All because he dared to put his heart into ink. And this wasn't rare. It was constant. An endless cycle of passion, secrecy, and betrayal. Lovers desperate to connect. Rivals desperate to expose them. Kings desperate to control the narrative. Advisors desperate to twist it for their own gain. Ask yourself, was it really about love? Or was it always about power? Because that's the truth. These letters weren't just private confessions. They were political bombs. They could be forged. They could be planted. They could be misread on purpose. And every one of them could ignite chaos. That's why the court buzzed with paranoia. Lovers looked over their shoulders. Spies lingered in corridors. Informants whispered in dark corners. No one trusted anyone. Not fully. Not ever. And yet, despite the danger, despite the risks, the letters kept flowing. Why? Because passion thrives in peril. Because desire doesn't listen to reason. Because for some, a single night of forbidden love was worth more than a lifetime of safety. So let me ask you, would you risk it? Would you write the words knowing they could destroy you? Would you open the letter knowing it might be the last thing you ever read? In the medieval court, countless people did, and countless paid the price. By the end of it, the truth is clear. Romance in the court wasn't whispered poetry. It wasn't candlelit devotion. It was espionage. It was strategy. It was war written in ink. A love letter wasn't just a symbol of affection. It was a blade hidden in parchment. And in a world where secrets were more lethal than swords, even a single line of longing could send you straight to the gallows. That's the deadly suspense of living in the medieval court, where love was never safe, where passion was always political, and where ink could be blood. Picture a chamber deep inside the castle. Velvet drapes fall heavy across the bed. Candles burn low. The air is thick with whispers and the rustle of silk. Here, in the most private of spaces, love is supposed to be safe, sacred, untouchable. But in the medieval court, the bedchamber was not a sanctuary. It was a battlefield. Because here's the brutal truth. Desire wasn't just a personal choice. It was politics. And the most intimate betrayals, those whispered between sheets, had the power to shake kingdoms. Queens stood at the very center of this storm. Their bodies were dynasties. Their reputations were crowns. One accusation, just one, could unravel everything. Did she smile too long at a night? Did she exchange a letter? Did someone say she did? That was all it took. And suddenly, the queen wasn't a wife. She was a traitor. Imagine being dumped and also tried for treason. Talk about the worst breakup in history. But sarcasm aside, the consequences were anything but funny. A queen accused of infidelity faced more than a bruised reputation. She faced trial. Torches lit the courtrooms. Crowds gathered. Advisors whispered. What does this mean for the throne? For the heirs? For the bloodline? Because in their world, adultery wasn't just sin. It was treason. And treason meant death. Think of Boleyn centuries later, accused of affairs with courtiers and even her own brother. Was it true? Historians still argue. But the accusation alone was enough to condemn her. Because when power is fragile, rumor is as sharp as any blade. Queens weren't the only ones trapped in this deadly game. Lords too schemed against their wives, twisting suspicion into leverage. If a nobleman wanted to discard a wife who no longer served his ambitions, an accusation of adultery worked better than any divorce court. She'd be disgraced, removed, sometimes executed. And he? Free to marry again, free to climb higher. This wasn't love. This was calculation. And then there were the knights, supposed paragons of loyalty, sworn to defend their king, their kingdom, their code of honor. But knights were still human. They still burned with desire. And sometimes that desire drew them straight into betrayal. Picture it. A knight, sworn to his king, slips into the queen's chamber. Every step echoes treason. Every kiss seals his fate. And yet, he continues. Because passion blinds. Because the heart doesn't weigh consequences. But the consequences always came. When knights betrayed kings in the name of lust, the fallout was catastrophic. These weren't just scandals. They were political earthquakes. A knight's betrayal questioned the king's authority, his masculinity, his very legitimacy. And kings, let's be clear, didn't forgive lightly. The punishment was brutal. Torture, execution, heads on spikes. Public humiliation to remind everyone. Betrayal in the bedchamber was betrayal of the crown. And yet, the scandals kept coming. Because desire doesn't stop for politics. It doesn't bow to crowns or fear executioners. It whispers, it tempts, it lures. And people followed, even when it dragged them to the scaffold. Now let's step back. Notice the pattern. Accusations of adultery weren't always about love. They were about power. They were weapons wielded by enemies, by rivals, by jealous spouses. Sometimes true, often fabricated. But truth hardly mattered. What mattered was who believed it. What mattered was how it could be used. Imagine standing trial, accused of betraying the king's bed. Maybe you're innocent. Maybe you're guilty. But in that moment, It doesn't matter. The verdict was often decided long before the trial began. The torches blaze. The crowd jeers. The execution block waits. And the irony? Some of these scandals started with nothing more than whispers, a sidelong glance, a rumor planted by a rival. One seed of suspicion could bloom into a full-blown accusation that toppled queens, shattered families, and ignited wars. Because bedroom politics never stayed in the bedroom. They spilled into battlefields, into alliances, into treaties. A single affair, real or invented, could fracture trust between kingdoms, could justify invasions, could redraw borders. Think about that. Lovers behind velvet curtains, setting the stage for armies to clash in muddy fields. Desire turning into bloodshed. Passion bleeding into politics. That's why we can't dismiss these scandals as side stories. They weren't footnotes. They were the script, the very currency of courtly life. And it wasn't just the accused who paid the price. Families fell with them. Entire noble houses were dragged down in disgrace. Servants tortured for confessions. Advisors executed for complicity. One queen accused might bring ruin to dozens of others, guilty only by association. The suspense of it all was suffocating. Every embrace carried risk. Every kiss carried danger. Every night behind locked doors could become tomorrow's trial by torchlight. So ask yourself, was it ever truly love, or was it always a gamble? Because in the medieval court, desire was never safe. It was a weapon, a trap, a curse disguised as a kiss. And the bedchamber, meant to be the most intimate of sanctuaries, was nothing more than another battlefield. By the end, one thing is clear. Betrayal wasn't the exception. It was the rule. It was the heartbeat of the court. The language everyone understood. The game everyone played. And love? Love wasn't tender. It wasn't safe. It was the sharpest dagger of them all. Picture this. A castle at midnight. The torches along the walls sputter, their flames bending in the wind. The halls are hushed, the revelry long gone. But not everyone is asleep. Somewhere in the silence, a door creaks open. A figure slips into the corridor. Cloak pulled tight, footsteps soft on cold stone. It looks like the start of a love story. But in the medieval court, every midnight meeting was a coin toss. On one side, passion. On the other, death. Because love in daylight was dangerous enough. At night, it became a gamble few survived. Imagine a knight sneaking through the castle gardens, heart pounding louder than his footsteps. He knows the risks. He knows the eyes watching from the shadows. But desire blinds reason. He pushes forward, every step a prayer that he won't be caught. But here's the absurdity. Knights weren't exactly built for stealth. Chainmail doesn't whisper, it's CLA and chaos. Picture him creeping through the hedges, sounding like a blacksmith's workshop. Subtle? Not exactly. And yet, people risked it. Again and again, they risked it. Why? Because forbidden love was intoxicating. The thrill of danger made every touch electric, every stolen kiss unforgettable. To meet at midnight was to cheat death itself, if only for a moment. But danger lingered everywhere. Was that footstep in the dark a lover or an assassin? Was that shadow behind a hedge an ally or a rival waiting to strike? Was a garden rendezvous truly secret or carefully staged to ruin you? Because in the medieval court, traps were everywhere. Rivals didn't just wait for mistakes. They engineered them. A knight lured into a meeting, only to find the queen's attendants waiting in ambush. A lady coaxed into a secret staircase, only to be caught accidentally by a passing servant. One orchestrated encounter, one false rumor, and reputations crumbled overnight. Picture a young couple, trembling hands locked together in the dark. They think they've outsmarted everyone. They think their love is safe. Then, torches flare, voices shout. They're surrounded. And in that instant, their romance isn't poetry anymore. It's evidence. Evidence of treason. And treason doesn't end with broken hearts. It ends with broken necks. The suspense was constant. Every meeting carried risk. Every whisper in the dark could echo too loud. Every kiss might be the last. It's easy to laugh at the impracticality. Lovers sneaking around with guards posted at every door. Ladies in waiting hovering like hawks, and chainmail announcing every move. But beneath the humor, the stakes were terrifying, because exposure didn't just mean embarrassment. It meant trials. It meant execution blocks. It meant dynasties unraveling in the torchlight. Let's not forget, sometimes the lovers never even made it to their rendezvous. Knights ambushed in corridors. Courtiers dragged away before reaching the stairwell. Rival nobles planting false letters to lure enemies into traps. Midnight wasn't just for lovers. It was for plots. Picture a knight walking quickly through the garden, convinced he's meeting his lady. He round the corner, and instead of her he finds steel. Blades drawn, accusations ready. By morning, his name is mud. By evening, his body might be cold. That's the razor's edge they walked. So why did they do it? Why risk everything for a few stolen moments? Because in a world where marriages were contracts, where love was scripted by politics, these midnight encounters felt real. They felt free. For a brief, stolen hour, lovers escaped crowns, treaties, and duty. For a moment, it was just two people, hearts racing, hands clasped. But freedom always came with a price. Ask yourself, was that kiss worth the noose? Was that embrace worth the block? Was that single night worth an entire dynasty collapsing? Because in many cases, it was. People risked kingdoms for passion. They risked armies, alliances, crowns. History remembers wars fought over land. But look closer, and you'll find wars sparked in gardens, on staircases, in moonlit chambers. That's the cruel brilliance of the medieval court. It turned love into a gamble, desire into treason, and midnight into a stage where every move was watched. Picture the torches flickering through the hedges, shadows sliding against the stone, a kiss stolen in the dark, a hand lingering too long, and just beyond, someone watching, always watching. Because in the court, secrets were never truly secret. And so, every midnight meeting carried its own sentence. Lovers might part with sighs and smiles, or they might part with shackles and screams. By dawn, no one could be certain which it would be. That's the truth of romance in the medieval world. It wasn't just forbidden. It was lethal. Every tryst was a test. Every shadow could hide a rival. Every embrace might be the last. So when you imagine those midnight meetings, don't just picture roses and whispers. Picture the footsteps in the dark. Picture the ambush waiting behind the hedge. Picture the torchlight flaring suddenly, illuminating faces twisted with fear. Because in this world, a kiss wasn't just passion. It was a wager, and the odds were never in their favor. Picture this. A rose, wilting on cold stone. A crown tipped on its side, abandoned beside a broken letter. In the distance, banners fall as soldiers march into battle. And behind it all, a single question echoes through the ages. Was it ever really love, or was it always power? Because in the medieval court, those two were inseparable. Lust and ambition blurred together until no one could tell where one ended and the other began. Every kiss might be devotion, or strategy. Every vow might be passion, or politics. Take the knight, swearing undying love to his lady. He kneels, he pledges. He risks his life for her ribbon tied to his lance. Noble, right? Romantic, even. But pause for a moment. Was he really worshiping her? Or was he angling for influence? Was his loyalty to her heart or to her access to the throne? In a world where love could make or break you, how much of devotion was true and how much was just calculation? And mistresses? They weren't just lovers. They were players. Some were confidants who shaped kings' decisions more than ministers ever could. Some whispered counsel in the dark of night. Their words carried into daylight as policies and decrees. They traded intimacy for influence, affection for authority. And often they won. But what did it cost? Imagine being the queen, sitting in state, the crown heavy on your head. Outwardly, you're the most powerful woman in the land. But across the hall sits your rival, not crowned, not anointed, not royal at all. Yet she holds a king's heart, and with it, half the realm. Who has the power now? These betrayals weren't just personal scandals. They were earthquakes. A knight's dalliance could shame a queen. A queen's rumored affair could delegitimize heirs. A mistress's whisper could lead to war. One broken vow didn't just ruin reputations. It redrew borders. Think about it. Alliances collapsed because of love. Dynasties fell because of lust. And entire kingdoms bled because someone followed their heart or pretended to. Here's the irony. The grand gestures that poets sang about, the passionate choices that seemed born of desire, were often the coldest, most careful moves on the chessboard. A marriage disguised as romance, designed to secure land. A dalliance staged to expose a rival. A betrayal timed perfectly to shift the balance of power. It was less Romeo and Juliet, more Game of Thrones. And let's be honest, medieval matchmaking was exactly Tinder swipe left or swipe right. It was throne swipe. Swipe here to gain land. Swipe there to crush a rival. Swipe wrong, and, well, you're probably dead. But let's strip away the humor for a moment. Beneath the sarcasm, the stakes were devastating. When passion was weaponized, thousands paid the price. Armies marched. Villages burned. Families starved. All because someone in a castle bedchamber couldn't, or wouldn't, separate love from ambition. So ask yourself, if you were in their shoes, would you risk it? Would you gamble everything? Your title, your life, your family, for a chance at passion? Or would you calculate? Would you choose safety, security, the cold embrace of strategy? Because in the medieval court, there was no safe answer. Love could doom you, but so could refusing it. Power could save you, but it could also enslave you. That's the haunting paradox. Even genuine affection was never free of politics. Even the sweetest romance carried the weight of ambition. And betrayal? Betrayal was always just a heartbeat away. Picture roses wilting against stone. Lovers clutching hands in secret, not knowing if this night will be their last. A mistress whispering words into a king's ear while rivals sharpened daggers in the dark. Crowns lying beside broken letters. Banners torn and trampled into the mud. This was the world of love in the medieval court. Beautiful, dangerous, never safe. So the final question remains. When kings gambled kingdoms, when knights betrayed their oaths, when queens risked everything, was it really for love, or was it always for power? The truth? It was both. Always both. And that's why the game was so deadly. Picture the battlefield. Banners snap in the wind. Drums thunder. Thousands of soldiers march across muddy fields. Swords glinting beneath a gray, unforgiving sky. But here's the twist, this war. It wasn't started by land disputes. It wasn't sparked by trade. No, this one began in a bedroom. Because in the medieval court, desire didn't just move hearts. It moved armies. Think about that. An affair whispered behind closed doors. A marriage contested. A promise broken. And suddenly, kingdoms were at war. Entire populations paid the price for bruised pride, for lust dressed up as love, for betrayal that stung so deep it demanded blood. Take the 100 Years' War. Sure, history will tell you it was about dynastic claims and thrones. But underneath all the politics, a tangled mess of marriages, broken vows, and disputed heirs. Love and legitimacy were the tinder, and ambition was the spark. Generations fought. Villages burned. Families were wiped out. All because royal beds were never just beds. They were battlegrounds. Now, picture a noble humiliated by scandal. His wife accused of infidelity. His honor questioned by rivals. Could he let it slide? Of course not. In a world where pride was everything, humiliation had to be answered with steel. So he called his banners. Men marched, and suddenly, what began as whispers in the hall erupted into screams on the battlefield. Who knew a love triangle could turn into a battlefield triangle? But that was the medieval reality. Personal betrayals became public wars. Imagine the scene in a great hall. A king learns his queen has been accused. True or not, it doesn't matter. His jaw tightens. His hand clenches on the goblet. Around him, courtiers exchange glances. Some smirk, some pale. And by morning, the gossip of a bedroom has become the strategy of generals. Alliances break. Rival houses seize the moment. And soldiers prepare to kill and die for honor that was wounded not by swords, but by sighs. And it wasn't just men raging over affairs. Women, too, wielded passion as fuel for war. Queens accused of betrayal often turned the tables, rallying support from lovers, allies, even foreign kings. Some manipulated scandal to shatter enemies and build empires of their own. The battlefield, in truth, began in the bedchamber. Picture the intimacy, a stolen kiss, a whispered vow, a night of passion. Then picture the fallout, riders galloping across fields to summon armies, torches lit in villages as soldiers march out, the quiet of the chamber replaced by the roar of war. That's how quickly desire could ignite catastrophe. And what's most chilling? The scale. Thousands of ordinary men dragged into conflicts born not from their grievances, but from the jealousies of their rulers. Farmers handed spears. Boys pressed into service. Families torn apart. All because a king's pride was bruised or a noble's affair turned into scandal. Let's pause here. Ask yourself, how many lives were lost because of love? How many wars were fought not for territory, but for passion wrapped in politics? Think of Troy, immortalized in myth, launched over Helen's beauty. The medieval world repeated that story again and again. A queen's honor, a king's jealousy, a knight's betrayal, and price? Entire kingdoms drenched in blood. Imagine a king standing over the bodies of his soldiers, knowing the war began with whispers in his own hall. Does he feel shame? Or does he still cling to pride, to the idea that honor demanded it? In that world, honor was everything. And once dishonored, the only redemption was war. And so banners rose. And so steel clashed. And so families mourned. Humor barely softens the horror, because truly the absurdity is staggering. Picture three nobles in a love triangle, glaring at each other across a hall. A month later, their armies are tearing each other apart in the mud. A petty feud transformed into catastrophe. Medieval matchmaking wasn't just messy, it was lethal. But behind the absurdity lies a sobering truth. Desire wasn't private. It was public. It was political. And once exposed, it consumed not just lovers, but nations. So the next time you imagine armies charging across a field, don't just picture strategy and steel. Picture the spark. Picture the moment of betrayal in a royal bedchamber, the whispered rumor, the jealous glance. Because sometimes that's all it took to set Europe ablaze. Love, lust, betrayal, and war. That was the cost of passion in the medieval court. Picture a throne room at dawn. The banners still hang. The crown still gleams. The scepter still rests on its pedestal. But look closer. Whispers curl through the air like smoke. Faces turn. Eyes narrow. A single rumor has begun its march. And by nightfall, the dynasty may be in ruins. Forget palace renovations. Forget invasions. Nothing demolished a dynasty faster than one whispered rumor of infidelity. Because in the medieval court, royal authority was fragile. A crown was heavy, yes, but it was also hollow. It depended on faith, on belief. The people had to believe their king was chosen. Their queen was pure. Their heirs were legitimate. Crack that trust, and even the strongest dynasty began to crumble. And that's why scandal was the sharpest weapon of all. Picture a queen accused of treachery. Maybe she smiled too warmly at a knight. Maybe a letter was intercepted. Maybe a rival simply invented the story. It didn't matter. Once the accusation spread, her enemies pounced. Suddenly, she wasn't a symbol of unity. She was a threat. Suddenly, her children weren't heirs. They were bastards. And suddenly, the dynasty was standing on quicksand. Consider the Valois dynasty in France. Rumors of infidelity swirled around queens, questioning the legitimacy of their children. Every whisper weakened the line. Every doubt became a weapon. Enemies didn't need armies. They only needed suspicion. Or think of Henry VIII's England. How many queens met the blade, not because of armies lost or treaties broken, but because of whispers in bedchambers? And Boleyn, accused of affairs with courtiers and even her own brother. Whether true or false hardly mattered. The scandal was enough. It shattered her, and with her, it shook the entire Tudor dynasty. That's the terrifying irony. Scandal didn't need to be real. It just needed to be believed. Imagine being a young prince, raised to inherit the throne. Then one accusation spreads. Your mother was unfaithful. Overnight, your entire identity collapses. You're no longer a rightful heir. You're a bastard. You're illegitimate. You're nothing. And all it took was one rumor. One rumor to erase a bloodline. One rumor to topple a throne. Now pause and ask yourself, how powerful is gossip? Stronger than steel? Deadlier than poison? In the medieval court, the answer was yes. Because steel killed bodies. Gossip killed dynasties. Picture a noble family at supper. The father beams at his sons, proud of the future he's built. Then a servant rushes in with parchment sealed in wax. An accusation. A whisper of treachery. A hint of betrayal. Suddenly, the father's smile fades. Suddenly, the future unravels. That was the ripple effect. What began as a private affair became a public crisis. Lovers turned into liabilities. Children turned into scandals. Families turned into rubble. And the enemies? They didn't even have to lift a sword. They simply fed the flames. Rivals whispered to courtiers. Courtiers whispered to advisors. Advisors whispered to kings. And by the time the king heard it, the story had grown claws. Suspicion did the rest. It's almost absurd when you think about it. Mighty dynasties ruling millions, commanding armies, controlling vast lands, all undone by a rumor of who kissed who in a candlelit chamber. But that was the reality. Power wasn't destroyed by sieges alone. It was destroyed by secrets, by accusations, by scandal. Picture the throne room again. A parchment stamped with wax, laid before the king. Advisors lean in, their faces eager, their voices sharp. The queen stands accused. Her hands tremble. The courtiers murmur. The people outside wait for the verdict. And in that moment, the dynasty's fate hangs not on laws, not on armies, but on whispers. How many families fell this way? How many houses crumbled because of love gone wrong, or lust too loud, or betrayal too public? Too many to count. Because in the medieval world, passion wasn't private. It was political currency. And once corrupted, it could bankrupt even the richest dynasty. So ask yourself, what lasts longer? A castle of stone, or a scandal carved into memory? For many rulers, the stone has long since fallen. But the scandals? They still echo. They still define their legacies. That's the chilling truth. Lovers became symbols. Betrayals became legends. And dynasties collapsed under the weight of suspicion. In the end, crowns didn't just fall to invaders. They fell to whispers. Picture the court at its most dangerous. The banquets are over. The laughter is gone. All that remains are shadows, whispers, and daggers hidden beneath velvet. This is where passion peaks. This is where love, lust, and betrayal stop being scandal and start becoming blood. Because mistresses weren't just secret lovers. Oh no, they were power brokers, strategists, manipulators, women who didn't need crowns to rule. They ruled through desire. Imagine a king leaning close to his mistress, confessing fears he would never voice to his council. She smiles, she soothes, she suggests, and by morning, her whispers have become royal decrees. Ministers replaced, wars declared, alliances broken, all because of words spoken in the dark. And queens? Queens were not spared. When a marriage collapsed, when love turned cold, accusations began to fly. And what better explanation for a king's discontent than witchcraft? Because naturally, when your marriage is falling apart, why not blame sorcery? Picture a trial by torchlight. A queen or a noble woman accused of using potions to cloud her husband's mind, of casting spells to ensnare his heart. The crowd gasps. The priests thunder. She protests, but the accusation sticks. Because in the medieval court, nothing explained betrayal better than magic. But witchcraft was more than excuse. It was a weapon. Rivals wielded it like a blade. Whisper sorcery. And suddenly your enemy wasn't just unfaithful. She was unnatural, dangerous, cursed. And curses, unlike affairs, could not be forgiven. And then there were the assassinations. Picture a corridor lit by flickering torches. A shadow slips through. A servant carries a tray, but beneath the cloth lies not food, but a blade. Betrayal sharpened to a point. Lovers turn killers. Husbands turn conspirators. Mistresses arranging the fall of rivals with a poison ring, a powder and wine, a knife in the dark. It sounds like the plot of a thriller, but it was real. Again and again, rulers trusted too deeply and paid with their lives. Think of a king slipping into his chamber after a night of revelry. He trusts the one waiting for him. He smiles. He kisses her hand. He never sees a blade until it's buried deep. Desire made him blind. Betrayal made him bleed. Or picture a nobleman cornered by rivals. The rumor of an affair, the accusation of witchcraft. It's all prelude. What comes next is steel in the dark. Bodies sprawled on cold stone, and another dynasty cut short. This wasn't scandal anymore. This was systemic collapse. Because once passion became weaponized, once mistresses ruled policy, and witchcraft explained betrayal, no one was safe. Not kings, not queens, not heirs, not even the lovers themselves. And here's the darkest irony. Many of these figures sought love, even if in twisted ways. A mistress wanted recognition. A queen wanted respect. A noble wanted freedom. But the court turned their desires into daggers. Every kiss could be poison. Every embrace could be a trap. Every declaration of love could be the last words a ruler ever heard. So let me ask you, what was more dangerous in the medieval court? The armies outside the gates, or the lovers inside the bedchamber? Because again and again, history shows the answer. It wasn't the battlefield that undid kings. It was the heart. Picture it all. Torchlit trials accusing women of witchcraft. Crowds hissing as queens defend themselves. Mistresses smiling in the shadows, pulling strings stronger than any general. Assassins moving silently through stone corridors. And rulers, undone not by armies, but by love twisted into betrayal. This is the climax of desire. The moment when passion no longer whispers. It screams. It burns. It kills. And by the end, the court is left shattered. Picture a cradle in a royal chamber. Silken sheets. A crown stitched into the canopy above. Courtiers gather, bowing, whispering blessings for the newborn heir. A kingdom breathes a sigh of relief. The line continues. The future is secure. Or is it? Because here lies the cruelest twist of all. The most dangerous secret in the medieval court wasn't whispered in gardens. It wasn't hidden in letters. It wasn't even the plots of mistresses or assassins. It was this: who was the real father of the next king? Think about it. Dynasties built entire empires on bloodline. Legitimacy was everything. But what if that bloodline wasn't what it seemed? What if the child in the cradle wasn't the king's? In an age without DNA tests, all anyone had was gossip and guesswork. And gossip, as we've seen, killed faster than swords. Imagine the tension in a king's eyes as he looks at his child. Does he see himself? Or does he see a rival? A knight who lingered too long in the queen's presence? An advisor whose loyalty seemed a little too personal? That seed of doubt could fester until it poisoned everything. And once suspicion spread, the kingdom trembled. Picture a mother in a dark chamber, clutching her child close, whispering secrets she'll never dare say aloud. Picture advisors exchanging glances, already calculating what it means if the heir is not truly an heir. Picture enemies sharpening their knives, not for war, but for scandal, because a questioned heir wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a political earthquake. Look at the Wars of the Roses in England. Rival claims tore the country apart, fueled by whispers of illegitimacy, by doubts about who was the rightful king. Families split. Brothers kill brothers. All because no one could agree whose blood was truly royal. Or think of Henry VIII again. His desperate quest for a legitimate male heir didn't just ruin marriages. It broke with Rome, tore apart Christendom, and changed the course of history. The line of succession wasn't just a family issue. It was a powder keg, and the accusations weren't always fair. Queens often bore the brunt of suspicion. If a child looked too different, if the timing was too neat, if a rival wanted leverage, suddenly she was accused. Was she unfaithful? Did she slip? Or was it all invention? The truth hardly mattered. The damage was the same. Imagine being that child, raised as a prince, groomed to be king, and then one whisper spreads, you're not legitimate. Suddenly, your crown evaporates. Your future vanishes. You're not heir, you're nothing. And once that accusation takes root, how do you prove otherwise? You can't. That was the nightmare of dynasties. Legitimacy wasn't certain. It was fragile. It rested not on truth, but on belief. And belief could be shattered with one well-placed rumor. Picture the king again, staring at his son across a banquet hall. The boy laughs, plays, smiles. But in the king's mind, questions twist like knives. Is he mine? Or is he my rival's? Am I raised in my successor or my enemy's child? That suspicion could unravel marriages. It could turn fathers cold. It could transform loving homes into cages of paranoia. And once the paranoia spread to the court, chaos followed. Advisors plotted to support alternative heirs. Nobles aligned themselves with true bloodlines. Kingdoms split, armies rose, wars erupted. All because of one unanswered question. Who was the father? And that's where irony cuts deepest. Dynasties prided themselves on blood, on the purity of line, on the certainty of legacy. But in reality, that foundation was built on sand. Secrets, lies, betrayals. The very core of power was unstable. So much history turned not on battles, but on beds. Not on armies, but on heirs. And heirs, as it turned out, were often shadows of doubt. Ask yourself, how many wars, how many dynasties, how many lives were destroyed not by conquest, but by questions of parentage? And here's the haunting part. We'll never know the full truth. The secrets died with mothers who never confessed, with kings who doubted but never proved, with children who grew to rule or to fall under suspicion. In the end, betrayal in the medieval court wasn't just about affairs or assassinations. It wasn't just about mistresses or poison. It was about this, about the bloodline, about the possibility that history itself was rewritten every time a crown passed to a head that may or may not have been rightful. So picture the cradle again, the silken sheets, the sleeping child, the courtiers bowing. They see security. They see the future. But lurking behind their smiles is doubt. Always doubt. Because in the medieval court, betrayal didn't just break hearts. It shattered dynasties. It rewrote history. And the cruelest betrayal of all, the possibility that the very foundation of power, blood itself, was a lie. Picture the castle now, emptied of its noise. The feasts are over. The music has died. What remains are guttering candles, shadows stretching long across stone walls, and a chill draft tugging at banners faded with time. The halls are silent, yet if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echoes, whispers, promises, schemes. This is where the veil lifts. Because love in the medieval court, it wasn't roses and moonlight. It wasn't knights serenading from beneath balconies, or queens sighing into embroidered pillows. No, love here was survival strategy, wrapped in poetry, masked with etiquette, dressed up to look like destiny. Courtly love, the grand invention of troubadours and poets, wasn't just about swooning and sighing. It was a script, a framework, a way to legitimize dangerous desires and disguise ambition as virtue. Imagine a knight writing verses about his lady's beauty. Sweet, right? Noble, even, but underneath the rhyme, what's really happening? He's staking a claim, declaring loyalty, signaling to the court that he belongs to her circle, her faction, her power. The sonnet wasn't just a love poem, it was a job application. And the irony? Court etiquette was basically HR policy, except instead of being written by lawyers, it was written by bards with crushes. The rules of love at court, never consummated, always noble, filled with longing and restraint, gave people a way to flirt without treason, at least officially. It was a loophole, a performance, a sanctioned form of desire that kept the chessboard in motion. Marriage treaties worked the same way. They weren't about tenderness. They were contracts, tools to bind allies, silence enemies, and produce heirs who legitimized entire dynasties. The vows spoken in chapels weren't promises of devotion. They were political signatures. And troubadour lyrics? They gilded the cage. They turned alliances into stories. They turned lust into legend. They turned survival into romance. But strip away the lace and the truth is harsh. For queens, mistresses, and knights, these games weren't harmless. They were deadly. A queen accused of straying could face exile or the scaffold. A knight caught in the wrong embrace could lose not only honor, but his head. A mistress who played her hand too boldly might find herself poisoned, forgotten, erased. Picture the evidence of it. Parchment seals cracking as treaties are broken. Rings removed from fingers when alliances dissolve. Quiet corridors where once whispers of desire carried, now abandoned, empty, cold. Because at its core, love in the medieval court wasn't about the heart. It was about the throne. It was the glue that held allies together. The mask that made ambition look purer. The balm that soothed suspicions. Until it didn't. So ask yourself, was it ever really love? Or was it just survival dressed in silk? The answer lies in those faded halls. Beneath the loot and lace, beneath the candles and poetry, romance functioned. To bind allies, to mute enemies, to ensure survival not of love stories but of dynasties. And by morning, the chessboard would reset. Another song, another marriage, another scheme. Always moving, always playing, always surviving. Picture the ruins, toppled heraldry, banners torn and blackened, standards scorched by fire and time. The battlefield is empty now, but the real wreckage isn't just in broken walls. It's in broken reputations. Because medieval scandals left more destruction than armies ever could. So what do the ruins teach us? What patterns emerge when the smoke clears? The first lesson is simple. Rumors outran riders. Messengers on horseback could deliver proclamations in days. But gossip? Gossip flew faster than falcons. One whisper in a courtier's ear became 10 by sunset. By dawn, the entire kingdom buzzed with scandal. A forged letter. A rumor of infidelity. A secret note intercepted by the wrong hands. And suddenly, dynasties tottered. In a duel between swords and gossip, always bet on gossip. The second lesson, intimacy was never just intimacy. It was leverage. A mistress knew her value wasn't simply in affection. It was in access. She heard what others did not. She whispered what others dared not. Sometimes she was a confidant shaping policy in the dark. Sometimes she was a scapegoat, discarded when her influence grew too dangerous. Queens, mistresses, ladies in waiting. Every woman at court walked a razor's edge. A single misstep, and they were accused. A single triumph, and they rewrote politics. Agency wasn't freedom. It was survival. And let's not forget the men of God. Clerics thundered from pulpits, warning that lust would drag kingdoms to ruin. They wrote sermons against passion, against sin, against desire. And yet, behind abbey walls, many negotiated exceptions. Kings sought annulments when convenient. Popes overlooked indiscretions if the alliance was valuable. Morality bent like a reed in the wind whenever expedience demanded. What does that tell us? That rules were never rigid. They were weapons, enforced when useful, ignored when not. Now pause. Imagine a queen accused of betrayal. Did anyone seek proof? Not really. The accusation itself was enough. Once spoken aloud, it poisoned the air. She could protest. She could plead. But the trial wasn't about truth. It was about power. That's another lesson the ruins whisper. Truth mattered less than the story everyone believed. And propaganda? It always outlived the facts. Take a forged letter. Maybe the queen never wrote it. Maybe the knight never saw her. But once the parchment was waved before the court, stamped, sealed, and whispered about in corridors, it became reality. And when the dust settled, when generations passed, the forged letter was copied into chronicles, and history accepted it. Imagine walking through an archive now. Illuminated manuscripts, marginalia scrawled in the corner of parchment, proclamations stamped with wax, each one a trace of scandal. Story preserved not because they were true, but because they were useful. That's the real wreckage. So let's codify the lessons. Desire destabilizes. Betrayal topples regimes. Gossip outpaces fact. And in a world where thrones were fragile, private passions always became public crises. What began as a kiss became a trial. What began as a rumor became a war. What began as a forged letter rewrote dynastic history. And the cruelest irony? It didn't matter if the story was true. What mattered was who told it best. Because the story everyone believes becomes a history everyone inherits. Picture a mirror, not polished silver, not a relic from a king's chamber, but the glow of your own phone screen. We've walked through castles, torchlit banquets, and velvet-draped scandals. But now, let's strip away the stone walls and the moats. No portcullises, no chainmail, just glass towers, PR teams, NDAs, and hashtags spiraling across your feed. Because the games of love and power, they didn't end with medieval courts. They just changed costumes. Back then, palace rumor mills churned faster than riders could gallop. Today, it's social media spirals, where one whisper can trend worldwide before you've had your morning coffee. Back then, poets strummed lutes and spun dangerous romances into legend. Today, we have spin doctors, carefully crafting statements of press, turning betrayal into conscious uncoupling. And poison? It's no longer slipped into goblets. It's reputational now. Careers destroyed. Lives dismantled. Not by arsenic, but by headlines, by screenshots, by leaks. We traded chainmail for comment sections. And let's be honest, are we really that different? Kings once stared across banquet halls, wondering who whispered against them. CEOs now glance at trending hashtags, wondering who leaked what. Queens feared forged letters slipped under doors. Politicians now fear text gone public or emails exposed at the wrong moment. Different tools, same anxieties. Picture it, a troubadour in the Great Hall, singing of noble love. Everyone sighs, everyone listens, even as they suspect the song is covering something darker. Now replace the lute with a press release. Replace the song with a statement posted online. Same performance, same sleight of hand. So here's the real question. When you watch, when you listen, when you scroll, do you believe the story? Or do you ask who benefits from telling it? Because that's the takeaway. Learn to read these performances with skepticism. When a scandal erupts, don't just ask what happened. Ask why the story is told this way. When love is paraded across red carpets or magazine covers, don't just swoon. Ask what it sells. When betrayal makes headlines, don't just gasp. Ask who gains from the fallout. We laugh at medieval gossip, at nobles destroyed by whispers. But look around. Are we really immune? A modern romance implodes, and it's plastered everywhere. A politician is accused, and factions sharpen knives. A celebrity posts one cryptic line, and suddenly millions speculate, amplify, judge. The spectacle thrives. The appetite hasn't changed. Because the heart still craves status. Safety. Belonging. We still use love as currency, just like they did. We still weaponize betrayal. We still reward scandal. Picture dissolve. Crumbling keeps fading into glass wall boardrooms. Parchment seals melting into push notifications. Velvet curtains pulled back into red carpets. Flashing cameras. Swarming press. The stage remains. Only the scenery shifts. And in the quiet after, when the noise fades, when the hashtags vanish and the headlines move on, what lingers? The same thing that lingered in the ruins of castles. The echo of a lute. The whisper of a story. The sense that it will all return again and again, just in different form. So we end here. Castles fell. Banners rotted. Names faded. But the games? They survived. The same games of love and power. The same hunger for survival dressed as romance. The same betrayals, sharpened into spectacle. Only the costumes change. Picture the empty Great Hall one last time. Candles guttering. Silence thick. A lute plays faintly, as if history itself is smirking, saying, "See you next season."